Cliff Richard vanished from the spotlight, now we know why. For decades, Sir Cliff Richard dominated British music charts with an unmatched longevity that earned him the title Peter Pan of Pop. With over 250 million records sold worldwide and a career spanning an astonishing 60-plus years, his place in music history seemed eternally secure. Then, without warning, one of music's most enduring stars seemed to vanish from public consciousness. It wasn't a gradual fade, it was like someone flipped a switch, revealed a former BBC producer who had worked with Richard on numerous television specials. One of the most recognizable voices in British music history suddenly went silent. No new albums, no tours announced, no television appearances. For someone who had been a constant presence in entertainment since the late 1950s, the absence was deafening. This disappearance wasn't just a brief hiatus or a well-earned retirement. It coincided with a series of events so devastating that insiders wondered if Cliff Richard, the eternally youthful performer who had weathered every musical trend from rock and roll to disco to electronic pop, might never return to public life again. Today, we're exploring the shocking truth behind Sir Cliff Richard's mysterious disappearance from the spotlight, a tale of betrayal, legal battles, and personal trauma that drove one of music's most enduring stars into seclusion. The real story involves not just personal struggles, but a systemic failure that nearly destroyed both his legendary career and his health. But first, let's explore the extraordinary position Cliff Richard occupied in music history before his sudden disappearance, and why his absence created such a conspicuous void in the entertainment world. The unmatched legacy that made his disappearance so shocking. To understand the magnitude of Cliff Richard's sudden vanishing act, one must appreciate the unprecedented position he held in music history. With a career that began in 1958 with his hit Move It, often cited as Britain's first authentic rock and roll record, Richard had achieved something no other artist in British chart history could match: hit records in 6 consecutive decades. Cliff wasn't just another aging pop star, explained a music historian who has documented British pop culture since the 1960s. He was a living institution, the only performer who had successfully navigated every musical era from pre-Beatles rock to the digital age. Even when his music wasn't trendy, his cultural relevance remained unquestioned. The statistics behind his career defy belief. Over 130 singles, albums, and EPs reaching the UK top 20, making him the third top-selling artist in UK singles chart history, behind only Elvis Presley and the Beatles. For generations of British music fans, Cliff Richard wasn't just a singer. He was a constant, as familiar and reliable as the monarchy itself. What made Cliff unique wasn't just his commercial success, but his cultural ubiquity, noted a longtime executive at EMI Records. Christmas television specials, royal variety performances, Wimbledon rain delays. Cliff was embedded in British cultural life beyond just his music. His sudden absence left a void in multiple entertainment contexts simultaneously. This cultural omnipresence made his disappearance all the more conspicuous. The artist, who had released at least one album nearly every year since 1959, suddenly stopped producing new music. His traditional television appearances ceased. His regular touring schedule, which had continued uninterrupted even into his 70s, came to an abrupt halt. What could possibly drive such a resilient, consistent performer away from the public that had supported him for over 6 decades? The answer begins with a police raid that would shatter his sense of security and unleash a media nightmare beyond anything he had experienced in his long career.
Crews that greeted him today, but he came to the High Court along with his friend Gloria Hunniford to describe the public humiliation he felt when the BBC broadcast a police raid on his home.
The raid that changed everything. On August 14, 2014, Cliff Richard's world imploded in a way that would have been unimaginable to the clean-living, deeply religious performer. While vacationing at his home in Portugal, he received word that his Berkshire residence was being raided by South Yorkshire police in connection with a historical sexual assault allegation dating back to 1985. What made this raid extraordinary and ultimately devastating for Cliff wasn't just that it happened, but how it happened, explained a former Metropolitan Police detective familiar with the case. The BBC had been tipped off in advance. They had a helicopter hovering over Richard's home, broadcasting the raid live while police searched his residence. It was unprecedented media coverage for an investigation at this preliminary stage. This extraordinary breach of standard police procedure turned what should have been a confidential investigation into a global media spectacle. Before Richard had even been interviewed by police, let alone charged with any crime, his home was being shown on live television, with commentators speculating about the allegations in real time. Imagine learning that your home is being raided not from the police, but from friends calling to tell you they're watching it happen live on television, said a longtime friend of the singer. Cliff described it as feeling like he was being hung out to dry before any proper investigation had even begun. The presumption of innocence, which is supposed to be the foundation of justice, was shattered in an instant. The immediate impact on Richard was severe. According to those close to him, he suffered physical symptoms of shock, including uncontrollable shaking, insomnia, and rapid weight loss. The performer, who had maintained remarkable health and energy into his 70s, suddenly appeared frail and diminished. It wasn't just the allegation itself, which he knew was false and would eventually be disproven, revealed a member of his management team. It was the public nature of it, the sense of betrayal by institutions he had trusted, and the immediate trial by media before he'd even had a chance to defend himself. For someone with Cliff's sense of personal honor, it was utterly devastating. This devastating public spectacle marked the beginning of an ordeal that would keep him away from public performance and recording for nearly 4 years, a period during which his physical and mental health would be severely tested by a system that seemed to have abandoned the principles of fair treatment he had trusted throughout his life.
I always eat the right food. I try to eat the right food for me. And today I went into the gym for 45 minutes, a little bit. Not to lose weight. I don't want to lose weight. I'm already slim.
The health crisis the public never saw. While the public witnessed Cliff Richard's disappearance from the entertainment world, what remained hidden was the severe health crisis triggered by the investigation and media coverage. A physical and psychological collapse that those closest to him feared might prove fatal for the then 73-year-old performer. What people don't realize is that Cliff nearly died during this period, revealed a longtime member of his inner circle who witnessed his decline firsthand. His body literally began shutting down under the stress. He lost over 2 stone, 28 pounds, in a matter of weeks. He developed shingles, which can be life-threatening for someone in their 70s. His doctors were genuinely concerned that the stress could trigger a heart attack or stroke. The psychological impact was equally severe. According to friends, Richard experienced symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder, including intrusive thoughts, insomnia, and moments of disorientation. The performer, known for his unwavering positivity and religious faith, found himself in a dark place that contradicted everything about his public persona. He would wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning in cold sweats, said a close friend who spent time with him during this period. Sometimes he couldn't remember where he was. This was a man who had performed flawlessly on stages around the world for decades, who never forgot a lyric or missed a cue, suddenly struggling with basic daily functions. It was heartbreaking to witness. The investigation dragged on for almost 2 years without charges being filed, extending the period of uncertainty and preventing Richard from fully recovering his health. Even routine activities became challenging as he faced the prospect of public recognition and potential harassment. He essentially became a prisoner, first in his Portugal home, then later moving between secure locations, explained a security consultant who advised him during this period. Every public appearance carried the risk of someone shouting accusations or photographers creating unflattering images that could feed the negative narrative. For someone who had always had a warm, open relationship with the public, this enforced isolation was particularly cruel. Medical professionals treating Richard during this time reportedly became so concerned about his deteriorating condition that they advised his management team to prepare for the worst. The combination of advanced age, severe stress, and physical symptoms created a potentially life-threatening situation that the public remained largely unaware of as the legal process slowly moved forward. What's remarkable isn't that Cliff disappeared from public life during this ordeal, observed a physician with expertise in stress-related illness, though not directly involved in Richard's care. What's remarkable is that he survived it at all. The physiological impact of this kind of stress on a person in their 70s can be catastrophic. Many people in similar situations don't recover. This hidden health crisis explains not just Richard's absence from the entertainment world, but also the profound change in his approach to public life even after the investigation concluded. A transformation from one of Britain's most accessible stars to someone understandably wary of the systems and institutions that had failed to protect his basic rights.
In a way, I still feel tarnished because insufficient suggests that maybe there's something.
The financial devastation few people understand. Beyond the severe health impact, Cliff Richard's ordeal unleashed a financial tsunami that few people fully appreciate. Costs so substantial that they threatened the security of even a performer of his legendary success. The combination of legal expenses, canceled opportunities, and career damage created losses estimated to exceed £10 million. The public assumes that someone with Cliff's track record must have unlimited resources, explained an entertainment industry financial advisor familiar with cases of this nature. But the reality is that defending yourself against allegations at this level, especially when the entire apparatus of the police and media is involved, creates astronomical costs that would strain even the most successful artists' finances. Richard's legal representation alone during the 2-year investigation reportedly cost over £3 million. This included not just defense against the allegations, but also simultaneous legal actions against both the BBC and South Yorkshire Police for their handling of the raid and investigation, complex litigation involving multiple Queen's counsels and teams of specialized attorneys. Beyond these direct legal costs, the career impact created even more substantial financial damage. Richard was forced to cancel a planned album release and promotional tour, delay a major autobiography, and withdraw from numerous high-profile television appearances and concert commitments. The revenue loss from these canceled projects has been estimated at between £4 to £5 million. There were also significant costs that can't be precisely quantified, noted a music industry executive who has worked with multiple artists facing public relations crises. The damage to his streaming numbers, the decline in back catalog sales during the investigation, the canceled endorsements and appearance fees, these represent millions in lost income that are harder to calculate precisely, but no less real. Perhaps most significantly, Richard's real estate holdings, which represented a substantial portion of his net worth, were severely impacted by the events. His Berkshire apartment, which had been the subject of the televised raid, proved effectively unsellable due to its association with the case. Richard was eventually forced to sell the property at a substantial loss, reportedly accepting over £800,000 below its pre-raid market value. The financial impact goes beyond just the immediate costs, explained a wealth manager who specializes in advising entertainment figures. Cliff was in his 70s, a time when most people are focused on financial security and legacy planning. Instead, he was forced to liquidate investments, sell properties, and redirect resources to legal battles rather than future security. That creates long-term consequences beyond the immediate expenses. These financial pressures help explain why, even after being fully cleared, Richard didn't immediately return to his previous level of public activity. The combination of health challenges and financial recovery needs necessitated a more measured, strategic approach to rebuilding his career and securing his future after an ordeal that had threatened everything he had built over 6 decades in entertainment.
The BBC to acknowledge that what it had done to him was unlawful. Before litigation commenced, we asked the BBC to accept this and to apologise.
The legal victory that came too late. After nearly 2 years of investigation, in June 2016, the Crown Prosecution Service announced that Cliff Richard would face no charges due to insufficient evidence. While this legal vindication should have represented a triumphant conclusion to his ordeal, the reality was far more complicated and bittersweet. The problem with these kinds of allegations is that no matter how thoroughly they're disproven, some damage can never be undone, explained a reputation management specialist who works with public figures facing similar situations. Cliff had to live with the reality that for many people, the raid and allegations would be the first thing they associated with him, regardless of his exoneration. This painful truth led Richard to take the extraordinary step of suing both the BBC and South Yorkshire Police for their handling of the case, a legal battle that would continue for another 2 years after he had been cleared of any wrongdoing. In July 2018, he finally prevailed in his privacy case against the BBC, with Justice Mann ruling that the broadcaster had infringed on his privacy rights in a serious and sensationalist way. The court victory was vindicating but exhausting, revealed a person close to the legal proceedings. Cliff had to relive the entire traumatic experience through depositions, testimony, and cross-examination. Even winning carried an emotional cost that extended the recovery period and further delayed his return to normal professional activities. The financial compensation, while substantial at £2 million including legal costs, represented only a fraction of his actual losses from the 4-year ordeal. More importantly, it couldn't restore the years of his career that had been irrevocably lost during a period when, already in his 70s, time was particularly precious. What people often miss about this case is that Cliff was in the later stages of his career when this happened, observed a music critic who has followed his work for decades. For a performer in their 30s or 40s, losing 4 years is significant but recoverable. For someone in their 70s, it represents a substantial portion of their remaining viable performing years. That's time and opportunity that can never be reclaimed, regardless of legal victories. The extended timeline of both the investigation and subsequent legal action explains why Richard's absence from public life lasted so long. By the time all legal matters were fully resolved in 2018, nearly 4 years had passed since the original raid, years during which he had largely disappeared from recording studios, concert venues, and television screens where he had been a constant presence for the previous 6 decades. This extended absence, combined with the ongoing stress of legal proceedings even after being cleared, created a profound shift in Richard's relationship with both his career and public life, a transformation that would become apparent as he cautiously began to re-emerge into the spotlight.
Lee and Ricky Nelson and Buddy Holly and Gene Vincent.
Yeah.
I mean, wonderful, wonderful people
They're
that we
the bad
kind
guys,
of...
weren't they?
Yes,
Yeah.
and they're the influences that created us.
The comeback on his own terms. When Cliff Richard finally returned to public life after his legal victories, fans and industry observers noticed subtle but significant changes in how the legendary performer approached his career and relationship with the public, changes that directly reflected the trauma he had experienced and the lessons he had learned from his ordeal. The Cliff who returned wasn't the same Cliff who disappeared, noted a concert promoter who worked with him on post-investigation performances. He was more selective, more protective of his privacy, and more deliberate about where and how he engaged with the public. This wasn't just a return to business as usual, it was the emergence of a more cautious, controlled approach to his public life. This transformation manifested in several concrete ways. Richard significantly reduced his touring schedule, selecting fewer but more meaningful venues, rather than the extensive tours that had characterized his previous decades. His media appearances became more carefully curated, with greater control over the context in which he would be presented and discussed. There was a fundamental shift in priorities, explained a longtime associate. Before the investigation, Cliff approached his career with remarkable openness and accessibility. Afterward, his well-being and peace of mind took precedence over commercial considerations or public expectations. He began making decisions based on what felt right and safe rather than what might be most profitable or promotional. Perhaps most notably, Richard became an outspoken advocate for legal reform surrounding privacy rights and the handling of investigations. His 2018 autobiography, The Dreamer, devoted significant attention to his ordeal and its broader implications for justice and media responsibility. What had been a private trauma became the foundation for public advocacy that added a new dimension to his legacy. What's remarkable about Cliff's comeback is that he refused to simply move on or pretend the ordeal hadn't happened, observed a media analyst who has studied celebrity privacy cases. He integrated it into his public identity, using his platform to highlight systemic problems that had affected him, but also impact many less privileged people who don't have his resources or visibility to fight back. This evolution helps explain why Richard's presence in public life has remained more limited than his pre-investigation activity level. What some observers mistakenly interpreted as a diminished career or semi-retirement actually represents a deliberate recalibration, a conscious choice to engage with the entertainment world on terms that protect his hard-won recovery and reflect his revised priorities after a life-altering experience. The question was never whether Cliff could return to his previous level of activity, said a member of his management team. The question was whether he would want to, After experiencing such a profound betrayal by systems and institutions he had trusted, his more measured comeback represents a thoughtful response to that question, a balance between reconnecting with his audience and protecting the recovery he fought so hard to achieve.
Innocent of what was alleged, but it took 2 years until the investigation concluded with no charge. I don't think people realize what it's like to have the
legacy protection that became his mission. As Cliff Richard gradually re-emerged into public life, those close to him identified a new priority that had fundamentally altered his approach to his career: the protection and preservation of his musical and cultural legacy after seeing how quickly 6 decades of achievement could be overshadowed by unfounded allegations. The ordeal created an existential question for Cliff, revealed a longtime friend involved in his business affairs. If 60 years of positive contribution could be so quickly overshadowed by false accusations, what would his ultimate legacy be? This concern became a driving force in how he approached the final chapters of his career. This shift manifested in several concrete initiatives. Richard became more actively involved in archival projects preserving his musical catalog, including remastering classic recordings and curating retrospective collections that highlighted his artistic evolution across 7 decades. These projects gained a new urgency after he witnessed how easily public perception could be redirected by forces beyond his control. There was a recognition that he needed to take a more active role in shaping how his career would be remembered, explained a music historian who collaborated on one such project. Cliff had always been somewhat modest about his contributions to pop music history, but the investigation created an awareness that if he didn't assert his own narrative, others would define his legacy for him. This concern extended beyond just his musical achievements to his broader cultural impact and philanthropic work. Richard increased his involvement with charitable causes that had long been important to him, including the Cliff Richard Tennis Foundation and various Christian organizations, ensuring these aspects of his life received appropriate attention alongside his entertainment career. What became clear was that Cliff was thinking about posterity in a way he hadn't before, noted a biographer who has documented his career. Before the investigation, he was so busy living his career that he hadn't focused much on how it would ultimately be contextualized historically. After coming so close to seeing his entire life's work reduced to tabloid headlines, legacy preservation became a primary focus. This legacy concern helps explain why, even after his legal vindication, Richard has been selective about new musical projects and public appearances. Rather than simply returning to previous patterns of activity, he has prioritized quality over quantity, focusing on performances and air recordings that reinforce the aspects of his career he most wants to preserve for future generations. Every appearance, every interview, every new recording is now viewed through the lens of, how does this contribute to the complete picture of my life's work, explained an associate involved in his current projects. That's a fundamentally different approach than the constant activity that characterized most of his career, but it reflects a hard-earned wisdom about how quickly public perception can change if you don't actively manage your own narrative. This evolution provides the final piece of understanding about why Cliff Richard seemed to vanish and why his return has been measured and strategic rather than immediate and comprehensive. His disappearance wasn't just about recovery from trauma or legal battles. It reflected a profound reassessment of his relationship with fame and a determination to ensure that his complete legacy would ultimately transcend the darkest chapter of his public life.